Well, this paper, the USA Today, is quite a good paper. In fact, I only started using it about a year ago and reading from it, and I get some good topics. Why do I bother reading this paper? Because it has two viewpoints. Even though the editors are on the Obama side, they voted for him. They also voted for the health care. About 30–40% of the papers I read are liberal, because you got to understand the mind of a liberal, progressive, or Democrat to really discuss things with them. They are, well-intentioned. I was too for about 30–40 years. But they are really self-destructive for those who listen to their words. The old saying is, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Well, there's a gentleman here who wrote an article. His name is Dwayne Wickham. He writes an article about every couple of weeks, and he's way over to the left. No question about it. In fact, he's further left than anyone in this paper who writes on the right side. But he is a man of courage. I like him for that reason. And this article that I will be talking about is important because I like to use the words of people who like Obama. And sometimes they strongly disagree with him. And tonight we'll talk about that article. I'm Straight Talk. Glad to have you here tonight. I'm broadcasting live from the RCTV studios of Reading, Massachusetts. The Earth, Milky Way, you never know who's listening. And this is la programa número 46. That means this is the 46th program, and I'm still alive, despite, in fact, this chair here is always reserved for somebody like Mr. Wickham. But we don't have anybody of his particular caliber in Reading, unfortunately. Or maybe they're hiding in their closets, one way or the other. Now, this show really is unique in the sense that if you're not moving around, of all the programs on RCTV Studio, this one will help you lose more weight than anybody else. Why? Because you get energized and exercised from the words I use. So glad to have you here tonight. And tonight we're going to be talking about the real Obama. This is the third in a series that I'll be having until after the election. In fact, if he wins, we'll be still talking about him. The real Obama is the one who he kind of pretends to be somebody else. And this is important for those who are trying to understand how to present him when you're meeting your friends, liberal friends, progressive friends, whoever they are. They'll be on my website, and you can see that at the bottom of the screen, johnnystraighttalk.com. So you'll have ready, accessible information, fully documented, to argue with the best. So this is the program that's entitled He Vows Jobs for Blacks but No Action. So this is the program. Tonight we'll talk about another incident of Obama who says one thing and does another. Republicans are the same. As I've mentioned to you, I'm not a Republican. I am a conservative. I'm a Constitution Party member. Believes in the articles written in the Constitution that we're straying badly from. I read many articles. Many of them are not on my side. But that brings a balanced position in terms of being discussion, debating, whatever you want to call it. I'm willing to handle numerous types of positions. Now, Mr. Wickham's column in the USA Today, and this was dated April 26, 2011, last year. So now let's look at some facts. I'll be stating exactly the words used in his article. And the first quote is this: "This is not an easy column for me to write. It's never easy to tell someone you like that he's a disappointment. I like Barack Obama." True believer in this gentleman. He's stating his position. It's not easy to criticize someone you like. And the fact that he's coming to this point indicates really some serious reservations about him. Second quote: "Today, the black rate is 15.5%, nearly double that of white job seekers." So in other words, the black unemployment is almost essentially twice. So it's pretty serious. Quote number 3. "The poor in urban America," he said in that 2007 speech, and Mr. Wickham is quoting Mr. Obama from his speech, "suffer most from a politics that has been tipped in favor of those with most money and influence and power." And Mr. Wickham continues, and then he asks rhetorically, Mr. Obama speaking, "How can a country like this allow it?" And Mr. Wickham says, to which he answered, "We can't." In other words, Obama is making a serious statement here. I believe he is sincere, and he's addressing his constituency. The fourth quote: "The president's failure to fight this problem as vigorously as he wages war abroad gets a pass from black leaders." That's a pretty strong statement. Gets a pass. "Many of whom complain to me privately, but remain silent in public. They're reluctant to challenge Obama the way," and here's a real hero, "Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. did to Lyndon Johnson in 1967. And that was a legacy that we don't see too often today. Among the black leaders, very rarely they criticize their own kind, except if you have a conservative, he does that. So why does Obama not help his black constituency is the premise here. What is it about him, and why is he doing this? He's irritating his base, truly. And this is a serious departure from a man running for president. Of course, he's got a record. In 2007, he wasn't the president, but these are the words he was using, fine words to use. And then he became president in 2008, and there's a little different tone in what's happened. Mr. Wickham, by the way, is a white leftist. With a name like that, it's difficult to understand which way it is, but I did a Google search and found out who he was. And he's a true believer on that side, because I've read his articles many times, because he always has a very interesting slant. And sometimes it's great for the program here to bring in that opinion that, unfortunately, you know, my liberal friends, I don't know, I told them, this is not electrified, this chair. There are no tacks. You know, one time I did use a tack in high school with a student. I still remember him yelling. It wasn't one of my better days as a student. I was always very serious, but the tacks were being used left and right. So anyway, there were no tacks, and there's no electricity to this. So you're welcome to come here and prove your value. Prove that you can make some reasonable statements about your position. But the reason you don't come is obvious to me, and I've proven this after 46 shows. There aren't any people who have courage in this town. We need a little backbone, you know, maybe a little crooked like my statement. Shh. Now that line is straight as I can make it, but obviously it may not be straight enough for you. There may be little molehills, some bumps and everything else. It's your job to straighten me out. Unfortunately, I say everything so properly and correctly there's nothing to say, I guess. That's what the public is understanding this to be. Anyway, so the first situation is that Dr. Martin Luther King was an extraordinary individual. He criticized people on his own side, even Lyndon Johnson. So is Obama like him? Not even close. It's unfortunate, not even close. And remember what Martin Luther King said, judge people by the content of their character and not the color of their skin. Yet we still have affirmative action. We have this plan, that plan, all these other things violate our own Constitution. I'll talk about that in a moment. Second, we have the black people. Of course, Obama is really, why does he choose black? He's half and half. It's about as perfect a candidate could be for the transition of America to a more diverse nation, I guess. Diversity is a scam anyway. We don't need diversity. We have it already. It wasn't my time. We had true diversity. Everyone was equal. Today, it isn't the case. I grew up in the 50s. We didn't have this affirmative action. It started roughly, Roosevelt had his affirmative action with the military, but really started with Nixon. Nixon, many people don't like him, but he's the one who helped to really launch it. He also launched EPA. You never hear the leftists talk about that because they know the truth, probably. So the blacks really vote like 95, 98, I think the highest ever was 98% when Obama came. The Messiah, Calypso Louis Farrakhan kind of coined that expression. Anyway, essentially, regardless what Obama does, these people are going to go lockstep and vote that way. So he can rely on those, the black people. So even though he's not giving them much for their work, as we know, he doesn't really care in that sense. He knows that he can rely on them regardless of what he says, essentially. Third, public programs help to keep black motivation, self-assurance, or assuredness, and independence low. That's what they're there to do. You got welfare programs. You have affirmative action supported by Obama and other black groups. I still remember even a Republican kowtowed to this idea of affirmative action. That's Mr. McCain, presidential candidate. Obama obviously believed in affirmative action. And Mr. McCain said, well, I got to do the same thing. He sold his soul. He didn't have the courage to speak his mind, Mr. McCain. He's a courageous guy, but when it comes to something like this, when you're continuing to give these programs to people who need to be built up, not to be, as the old Chinese proverb I've used many times, give a man a fish, you fed him for the day. If you teach a man to fish, he doesn't have to fish for anything else from the Democrats. He can provide for himself. But the notion is among the black leaders, NAACP, the Black Caucus, all of these black people continually feed the fish to their constituents. I really call them charlatans in a sense. They are, because they really don't really care how their own people are being brought up. The people come to this country, have great opportunities, even blacks from Africa, and they wonder this attitude the local black people have. And, we talked about Obama being half black, half white. He likes the word black because it gives him more credentials, I guess. But I admire him from the standpoint, we have a true person, the transitional person that was supposed to be the most important in the transition of this country. And yet, he presents himself only on one side of the fence. Anyway, why don't they ever talk about the affirmative action in the sports? You know why? Because there isn't any. It's a true people with capabilities ascend to their best position. Do you hear any of the black leaders talk about how proud they should be? That here's a microcosm of where the blacks have been very successful, and they did it on their own. There wasn't any affirmative action, no special programs. True meritocracy, that is merit, based on capability of the players. The white people are not crying discrimination because they believe that they earn their position, that is, the blacks have earned their position, and they deserve what they have. Yet, if it was the other way around, like our famous Jesse Jackson, the real racist pimp, is that an acceptable word here? I don't know, racist, goes down to NASCAR and say, you know, you don't have enough black guys driving cars. And that's how he makes his money. He kind of bribes. I mean, he actually takes advantage of the owners and says, oh, okay, we'll do something different. We'll do. Really, a terrible person to be. And I voted for him one time. He was running for a presidential candidacy. He was a great speaker. And yet, look what he's turned out to be. Intimidation of corporations for guilt-ridden executives. It's amazing. It's amazing. A sad story, sad person. I'm glad he's kind of trailing off into the sunset. Anyway, another thing here is that Lawyer Obama doesn't advocate at all trying to, believe in the Constitution. He may use a Constitution word because it's, a nice thing to feel about. Now he's aligned with the framers. Of course he isn't. But, we have the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, which states equal justice under the law. Now here's a Lawyer Obama, Harvard grad. He's forsaken his alma mater. But he's shameless in that respect. In fact, to the point where you try to get, I have to confirm this, but all of the information I have are from others, but I believe this is true. He has not released anything about his college work, his law bulletin or that he used to be in charge of. Nothing. It's sealed. Why? Why, in a free society, we have to have a person who declares this kind of information off base? Of course, I don't like the fact that Romney, when he left as governor, there were lots of files destroyed, erased. And so it's really, interesting. I'm giving you two examples. But Romney releases college grades, as I recall. Of course, we're waiting for Kerry's military background and records, but he won't release his. I don't believe he's ever done so. Anyway, then we have the famous case, indicating where Obama is in reference to race. And that was a Harold Gates fiasco. Harold Gates is a person who's done some good work. He's been a professor at Harvard. He lives in Cambridge. And I admire some of his genetics work, DNA studies, in terms of finding out, where different people are and what his background is. I think he's part white. I'm not sure how much, but he may be. He is, I know that. So, and he traced some ancestry of other people. Anyway, Obama gets up in a press conference, which is nationally broadcasted, nationally. And he says, I don't know all the facts. Of course, why does he need all the facts? He's, you've heard him enough to know he's arrogant in many respects. I don't know all the facts, but I know the Cambridge Police Department acted stupidly. Well, here he is pandering again, a moment where he could have shined in terms of this issue, and he failed to do so. First, he's a lawyer, pseudo-lawyer. He makes a judgment before he examines the facts. So obviously he must have really been emotionally upset. Harold Gates probably called him. He says, do something. Of course, he jumped at Harold Gates. This is a lawyer. This is a lawyer. This is Obama's law. Judge first, then examine the facts later. And don't ever forget, he was a community organizer. You know, we have someone leading a nation as a community organizer is his resume. Really, you know, many Americans made a race-based decision, which is called racist, but you know, a race-based decision by many of the independents falling for someone who had the thinnest resume in modern times, and you trusted him, and this is what you got. This is what you have. So why doesn't Obama help his black constituency more? Well, if you'd like to call in, by the way, there's a call-in program. It's 781-944-8888 anytime. And hear what you have to say. Fourth, now, Obama knows joblessness among blacks is a very difficult problem. And once he starts down this road, it's very difficult. He knows that 70% of families are fatherless. Not just for a while, for decades. In the 50s, maybe about 30%. Now it's up to 70. And it's been that way for a while. There hasn't been really any significant change. You have DeVal. What's he done? Well, you know, I admire this. One time he was talking about black teens. You know, their pants are down to their buttocks, I guess. And I can imagine if he was on TV, I don't think he'd ever do it, but he says, how can you get a job? You're not dressed for success. That's the last time you ever heard anything about what black families should be doing. Obama has said a few things in the past, but really been very minimal. Education. Well, education per pupil is about twice as much for the inner city than it is for a town like Reading. Now, they claim it's not good enough. They want the same amount of money spent by Weston. I mean, forget about Reading. Reading's nothing. There's never enough. Enough is never enough. This is when you're bondage to the Democratic Party. One last particular case here. Example, Mr. Bill Clinton one time had a dialogue called A Dialogue on Race with Bill Clinton. It was Jim Lehrer on PBS. 8 persons, white and black, got together. It was a dialogue on race. He had 4 panels from 1997 to 1998. Have we had such a plan? Does Obama have a plan? Public discussions on jobs. Anyway, this. But yet, his sidekick, Eric Holder, the Attorney General, comes out within a year after the Obama administration came on board. He says, and this is on February 18, 2009, during Black History Month, in a CBS article called Stinging Remarks on Race from Eric Holder, said, United States is a nation of cowards. You know, mister? Oh, we got a call, so here we go. Well, whoever the call was, oh, waiting here. You gonna ring me in or what? Okay, well, we'll have to wait. Here's Eric Holder. Unquestionably had the approval of Obama to use these words. Well, Eric Holder is the most cowardly person ever. In the last 3 years, he hasn't called a race discussion. You see what I mean? They say one thing, that we're all cowards, yet when the time comes to sit at the table and to speak about it, they just like to throw bombs out there because they're not competent enough to discuss this. And don't you think that Obama didn't approve what he said? Anything Eric does, whether it's going to the bathroom or taking a shower, Obama gives him the approval. Okay, we're coming to the end of the program. whoever was ready to come on, well, you know, you still have a few more minutes. We have a serious problem with race in this country. But in many ways, it has improved dramatically since the 1964 Civil Rights Act of Lyndon Johnson. We know we've given them money for education. There's not much discrimination, but more and more you hear from the Black Caucus, you hear from NAACP, Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, the great Al Sharpton. Boy, is he trying to make a conversion. I give him a lot of credit for losing about 70 pounds. That's really good, Al. So all you have to do now is get a little bit more into the mainstream. I know you've been trying hard. You've gone on to Bill O'Reilly's program and all that. Anyway, we have a way to go. And what's happening is the black leadership like to have the blacks beholden to them. And that's why Gingrich calls it the food stamp party. Democrats are the food stamp. The Democratic Party is a food stamp party. And it's very much true. More and more people, even middle-class people, are getting food stamps. You know, if everyone depends on the government, then you can have everything you want. And of course, we had the famous statement from Reagan, a government that gives you all that you want will take everything. And all of the irresponsible will gain, and the responsible will lose. That's what will happen. So it is sad to see what's happening. Race will always be an issue because we have someone in the White House who's 50% white and 50% black who plays the race card with this Harold Gates incident. The time he could have shined, he made such a mistake that he had to have a beer summit to discuss the issue. And man, was that deadpanned, if you can ever think. They just didn't want to be there. Mr. Crowley, who was a sergeant, who Harold Gates was kind of referring to him as the white man on the plantation. Well, Harold Gates is the black man on the plantation, and the white man is serving him. There was some references to that. So the Democratic Party is a party of enslavement of people. And that's the way it's been. And I don't see any change, and that's why they have an open borders policy they would like to have, which is completely undesirable. They don't mind how you got here, whether it's illegally or otherwise. We need your vote, and that's why they're going there. They're getting more desperate, minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day. They are getting more desperate. In fact, there was a fantastic article written in the Wall Street Journal showing that the number of registered voters for Democrats have dropped, and the number for Republicans have increased during this time. And even the Democrats realize, some of the ones like myself made the transition to not be a party of bondage, taking advantage of people, which is shameless. But who said the Democrats want to be anything else? You know, I call them anti-American, and I mean the leadership. Someone called me out on this because I was calling all the Democrats anti-Americans. Well, you know, truly, I would say that it is the leadership of the Democratic Party is shameless, and they'll do anything possible. And those who belong to the Democratic Party are complicit in that position. So wake up, Democrats. Become independents. Do not get beholden to either of the two major parties which have driven us during this terrible financial crisis. Carl Graydon Pierce. It's very interesting. I get my final slide here. It's great talking to you tonight, and I'm sorry our one-time caller disappeared. I may have dropped him off, but it's good talking to you. It's always a pleasure talking about the issues of the day. And let me get my paper here, and let's troll the paper again. Maybe there'll be something else I can find. Well,